Welcome to the science of weight composition, body fat, and weight loss. These modules are going to be broken down into three parts, and these lessons are going to be a little more scientific, so just be warned. But I do feel that it's important for us to talk about what's going on in the background. And again, you won't be tested on any of this afterwards. You don't really have to understand to such a super high degree what I'm going to be discussing with you, but it gives you an idea of how this process works and also what your body is made of. So, one of the greatest misunderstandings of any weight loss program and any weight loss effort is not having background knowledge of the science of weight loss, body fat, and body composition. This creates a lot of unnecessary agony throughout the journey. Programs, plans, practitioners, coaches, doctors, etc., anybody who tries to speak about nutrition and ways to lose weight without talking and addressing these things really make the world a much harder place. When we have an understanding of how it all works and fits together, it really does become a much smoother process. We demonize body fat so much. Fat is your friend. And this is not a health at every side speech because it's okay to not like your excess body fat and desire to change it. That's okay. But the role of fat in the body is actually super protective. And when we understand its function, we can stop fearing it. We don't have to have it be our best friend and mean that we want to keep it on our body, but we can stop demonizing fat in a way that's not productive to our goal. Because there's a difference between what you think of as your weight versus what body fat is, especially in the body. So, this is an idea of getting comfortable with weight, getting comfortable with what your body weighs, and separating it from that being this evil, demonized body fat, especially if you don't like what that number is. Now, let's talk about body weight composition and what is actually making up that weight number that you see when you step on the scale. Body weight is more than just body fat. All of these different things contribute to how much you weigh. Your weight is broken down into fat mass and lean mass. Your lean body mass is weights of your muscle, organ, bones, skin, body water, and then fat is the weight of your fat. And then you have bone mass. You have, again, muscle. You have protein, how much protein you have in your body, the protein stores, and you have total body water. And your total body water is broken down into extracellular, so things that are outside of the cells, and then intracellular, things that are inside of the cells. This truly gives us a look into the comprehensive picture of your metabolic health. When we break down your total body weight into these different segments. If right now you do not like what that number is, what your body weight number is, that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But you need to understand that is not just fat. It is way more other parts of you that go into what that number is. So, muscle. Muscle is a part of lean body mass. Skeletal and smooth muscle. So, organs such as like your heart, your GI system, your kidney, your lungs, that's smooth muscle. And then we have skeletal muscle, which is probably what you think of when you go to the gym to lift muscle. That's skeletal muscle. Muscles are made up of water and protein. This is why we want to eat a lot of protein to support this muscle mass, because the more muscle that you have on your body, the rate at which you burn energy increases. The more energy your body will use. And you are also better able to utilize glucose uptakes. So, creating a state of blood sugar balance. The more muscle that you have, the easier it is for glucose to get out of the blood into the muscle because you have a lot of it. So, that stabilizes having those blood sugar spikes and dips. If you don't have a lot of muscle on the mass, on the body, your body becomes more vulnerable to the glucose that you're eating. And this is why when you lose weight and having that weight come from muscle mass and not body fat sets you up for failure because you're just going to gain that back super, super easy. And again, muscle for aging and longevity is super important because it really contributes to your mobility and balance. So, again, being less vulnerable to things like falls when you get in old age, if you have a good amount of muscle, having a lot of muscle is a great indicator of the quality of life that you're going to live as you get older. So, you want to really focus on building up that muscle and maintaining that muscle. So when we're going on this fat loss journey, when that's our goal, we want to make sure that we're losing body fat and we're not losing this precious muscle and we're eating a lot of protein to support that muscle. And I give you these kind of number ranges just as guides. They're not absolute. So depending on what your age is, this is kind of the body percentage of muscle that you want to be aiming for. Again, not absolutes. I'm not a numbers person in the sense of I don't like to, if you're 20 years old and you have, 62% muscle instead of 63, that's not a big deal. But this gives you a range. This gives you something to assess where your baseline is and also how much you're progressing. I also like to look at these or use these types of number ranges in the sense of, okay, if you're losing weight and we're tracking that progress, is your muscle mass getting lower or is it getting higher? Where are you falling along these percentages, especially based off of where you started and then where you are? So that gives you that context of the quality of weight loss, if that makes sense. But again, by no means, I don't recommend these as like strict goal numbers that you have to reach and this is the only way that you're going to be healthy. This just gives you context. This just gives you an idea and a range to kind of base off of. And bone mineral. So bone is also part of your lean mass. That's why DEXA scans are super helpful, especially as you get older. And really, osteopenia and osteoporosis are really avoidable conditions in old age that we want to make sure that we're accounting for and structuring our eating and structuring our fat loss goals and structuring our body composition in order to make sure that we don't get into those conditions like osteopenia and have low bone mineral in our body because that helps. Again, bones are actually living tissue that is vital to your overall health as well as your structural framework. Bones contain nerves, blood cells, marrow, so red blood cells, and is also storage site for super important minerals like calcium, potassium, phosphorus, magnesium. Our body relies on having these mineral banks for functioning. If you are not consuming enough calcium in your diet, your body will take calcium from the bone. Your body will go to that mineral bank, take out calcium, do what calcium needs to do within the body. And then over a period of time, that's how the bone gets weaker because we're not replacing. We want to eat enough of those minerals like calcium, potassium, phosphorus. We want to eat enough from our diet so our body can use that for what it needs to do and keep the mineral storage banks in the bones so the bones stay strong and healthy. And again, so your overall sort of bone mass percentage depends on, again, how much your weight is. So this gives you guides for females and males. And obviously these are in kilograms, so you just times it by 2.2. Not going to give you the pound, but this gives you a goal to see again where you're landing. If your weight is between 50 and 75 kilograms, and you're not even close to this 2.4 kilograms for your bone mass, then we're looking at a problem here. We're looking at a mismatch. We're looking at you have weak bones and we need to get that higher. And also, too, most of the times, if you are at a higher weight, your bones tend to be stronger because, again, they need to account for holding up the structural framework of that body weight. But still, the idea that we want to keep in the back of our mind is that we want to account our diet for including these minerals and making sure they're getting into our body so our body does not take them from the bone. But when we think about it, your total body weight, if it's at a higher number, and you have a higher body weight, and you're not liking that number, understand that your bone weight is going to be higher to account for that. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind. So water is also part of your lean body mass. I have an entire YouTube video on literally everything you would want to know about water and fat loss because it is the absolute foundation of importance of making sure you have enough water in your body for all types of functioning, for all human life, for every single condition, and also for fat loss. And I also have a blog post that goes into how to drink a lot of water in the winter season because that can be really hard. And it's definitely not an easy thing to drink a lot of water. But about 40 to 60% of body mass is actually water fluid. The human body requires intracellular, which are inside the cells, and extracellular, which is outside the cell, in order to biochemically function. There are large variations in the amount of fluid in the body due to water losses through urine, so how much you're going to the bathroom, sweat, how much you're sweating, and how much you're breathing, and also the pattern of your breathing. Are you a mouth breather? Are you a nose breather? Things along those lines can actually affect what water is doing and how much water is lost through that process. Your hydration status is also based on how much alcohol you're consuming and how the body has to process through, because any kind of toxin that you're either consuming or being exposed to, the body needs to process that through the liver. All those chemical reactions that it takes to get that from one end to the other and keep your body safe and functioning properly requires a very large amount of water. Also, inflammation, states of inflammation, inflammatory conditions, menstruation, environmental factors, dietary components, all sorts of things. There's a lot of different things that really impact water levels in the body and also create either higher or lower needs. So, there are, again, certain conditions and medications might require something like a water restriction. So, if that's you, really be mindful and make sure, again, you're talking with your doctor when we're talking about our water needs because this is going to impact you versus a situation where you didn't have this condition, let's just say. And again, our body needs a lot of water for all types of cellular functioning. And as I mentioned, including fat loss. So your water needs are going to increase when we're talking about active fat loss, that phase 2. And you can see for females and males, that green is like that healthy range. Again, 40 to 60% is, as I mentioned, a guideline number. So if you're way far off of that or on either end of the spectrum, this gives you an idea of where you should be or where you should be aiming to be when we're talking about your individual body weight. And now let's talk about body fat. So adipose tissue is what is known as body fat. It is considered an endocrine organ and it's essential for regulating energy through the storage of fuel, proper brain, nerve tissue, bone marrow, and cell membrane development, hormone production, and internal protection and insulation. It does a lot of things. The location of stored body fat in the viscera, which is deep between your abdominal organs, is when we have metabolic dysfunction if this is in excess. So you have that subcutaneous fat, which is surface level fat. You can have excess subcutaneous surface level fat, but a low visceral fat, and you could be overweight or obese, but metabolically healthy. And it also works oppositely, where you could have a pretty low surface level body fat, so you kind of look good on the outside, but then have a high accumulation of fat in the visceral area, so high amounts of visceral fat. And you can actually have a lot of metabolic dysfunction and potential disease and disease states based off of the location of the different types of fat. So, from a scientific standpoint, before you even ask the question, there is no way to pinpoint where you lose body fat. You can't, spot treat, like, oh, we're going to lose body fat in the viscera versus we're going to lose body fat in the arm. There's no scientific proof that shows any of that is possible. So when we're thinking of losing body fat, we're losing it in totality throughout the body. But when we're thinking about visceral fat, there are some lifestyle strategies that we can think about incorporating that help shift the way that the body does store that fat. So we'll get to that kind of later, or it's not super important in the sense of like you need to know exactly all the things that we're going to be talking about. Focus on supporting losing extra body fat in all locations. So this is pretty small. You might not be able to see it specifically, but this gives you, again, that green range for males and females. It depends on your age, gives you an idea of where you should be landing for quote unquote healthy range. As I mentioned before and many times over, I'm not a numbers person. I never go by exact numbers. I round about everything. So take this with a grain of salt of it's helpful as a tool to show where your baseline is and then show how you're progressing, but it's non-absolute where health is affected on either end of the spectrum. But again, these are the ranges based off your age that you want to keep in mind of if you're close to that, if you're around that, then you're looking good, or that's kind of like the place that we strive to be at. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into fat's role in the body. Body fat, as I mentioned, is actually an endocrine organ. A lot of times people just think it's, no use in the body, where it was always once looked at of just like, well, body fat's just fat, let's just get rid of it. But it actually is considered an endocrine organ. It's super dynamic, super active. It communicates with the body constantly, and it's very, very sophisticated in this communication. And its main job is actually survival. Fat is our battery. And when I mean battery, it means it fuels our body for that long lasting energy in order to survive. Because throughout our whole human history, having fat on the body actually meant ability to survive. So it was a really good thing if you had extra fat on your body, because that meant, hey, you weren't going to die. You were going to be able to survive whatever was happening in the world. But our bodies have not have not evolved to know how to actually lose it effectively. When we think about how mammals were able to adapt during all of Earth's catastrophes and get to where the human species is today, it is because of body fat. It is because we have the ability to store this body fat. The evolution of mammals, how humans have got to where they are today, they were able to survive by going into caves, going into super dark places, going into cold places, going into situations that they were going to be without food for a long period of time, and they had to hide from predators. Body fat gave them this advantage to survive. Any other species that did not have a lot of body fat or needed to eat constantly and couldn't utilize this stored fuel died. They absolutely died because they needed that body fat in order to survive and make it. And again, that's how our bodies have adapted to easily take on this fat, because it helps with reproductive success. So the more fat that you have in the body, the more you're able to reproduce offspring, carry on the species, and hence survive. Our current bodies have not evolved to effectively lose this fat because, again, having the fat in the first place meant survival. It meant you were able to reproduce. It meant you were able to carry on the species. So our body learned how to make it, learned how to keep it very, very efficiently, learned how to store it and use it to our advantage. But now it's like confused as to, okay, but now you want to get rid of this. It's not equipped to handle that. The human species is 70 million years old. And for the last I said 7 million years old. And for the last 2 million, we have been hunting for our food. And this was a super active lifestyle that really was about constant and frequent movement throughout the day. And so historically, our ability to have stored fat was our safety net. Because when we're hunting for food, it puts us at risk for burning up too much energy trying to acquire more energy. Like trying to acquire that food, we're at risk of burning all of that energy off. So our bodies really, really smartened up and said, okay, in order for us to do this better, we need to make sure that we can tap into stored energy and have it just in case we're not able to replace it soon. So it's actually one of the most amazing biological mechanisms. It's a feat of evolution that we were able to effectively or very easily store fat on the body because honestly, having that stored energy really frees us up from having to continuously eat to survive. So we were able to do things like, I don't know, advance society, read books, play sports, because unlike other animals, we weren't tied down to having to hunt for fuel to replace all the energy that we use every single hour of the day. We're able to eat and then say, hey, we can do other things for the rest of, 14 hours of the day. We don't have to constantly just wake up like some other animals and species and say, hey, the only thing that we need to do today is find food. And it takes us so much time and energy to find that food. By the time we find it and eat it, it's time to go to bed again. So fat is actually your best friend, like one of the most amazing things that has happened to your biological mechanism. And now let's go into the functions of body fat. So, as I mentioned, body fat is super, super active. It's always talking to the body and it does so many other things than just making a dress size too tight for you. It communicates to your body via hormones. So, it communicates to your body through things like leptin, angiopectin, resistin, things along those lines, those types of hormones that regulate your metabolic homeostasis. It's a mechanical protection, so it softens impacts of shock. And also, with the fact of the hormones, in a situation where the body has too little body fat, it can actually reduce your sex hormones and cause something like infertility, for example. But mechanical protection, this allows, like the softening or the fat in the body allows the softening impacts of any type of shock because it allows sliding of muscle bundles without compromising their integrity. So you're able to maybe get hit or fall down or have accidents and your bones aren't breaking and your, body's not ripping apart because you have this mechanical protection layer. It's also a thermal insulator, so it has a role in maintaining body temperature. Fat is the most important buffering system for lipid energy balance. So, fatty acids, which are cells of fat, or broken down fat, I should say, are exceptionally efficient fuel storage. And the body has ability to accumulate and provide energy when necessary. Fatty acids and your fat tissue is always ready to be oxidized to produce large quantities of ATP, which is energy, whenever you need it, because that is a very highly reduced hydrocarbon tail. That's biochemistry. You don't need to know that, but that's the reason why it has this ability. So it's so important for that buffering system. So your body's never without the ability to survive and live because of uh, stored fat being able to be oxidized in this way for that energy. So you can think about it as like a backup energy generator. Whenever you don't have enough fuel or even overnight, right? If the body's not continuously getting food, fuel source, but you're not dead, you're still living, you're just sleeping, you need a backup energy generator to fuel the body so you don't die in the middle of the night. And that's what your body fat does. So if you don't have a lot of it, that's a problem. Cellular composition and capacity of fat tissue varies depending on where it's located in the body. This is what I was talking about of like that subcutaneous versus visceral fat. So, fat's not just composed of fat cells, it's also composed of blood cells, endothelial cells, periocytes, adipose precursor cells, things that are very tightly packed without water, which differs from glycogen in the muscle, which is the storage carbohydrate fuel. That has a lot of water into it. And so that's the classic picture of if you eat a high carbohydrate diet, or if you, let's just say, go on vacation or you travel or you're in any type of situation where you eat a large amount of carbohydrates than maybe your body's not used to, that packs on a lot of extra water in the body and leads to a huge increase in your body weight from that water because glycogen, carbohydrates come with water. Fat is tightly packed without water. And it does vary depending on where it's located in the body. Is that subcutaneous surface versus that visceral? Again, the visceral has a direct impact on your metabolic function. The subcutaneous, not so much. And fat cells expand in size to accommodate increased storage needs or in situations of overnutrition. So when you eat too much, or again, your body for whatever reason needs to increase fuel storage, your fat cells will get bigger and they shrink when we lose fat. So they don't necessarily, you don't add more of the fat tissue, it just increases and shrinks in size. And something that to wrap your head around when I'm talking about the different types of fat, if you think of subcutaneous fat, which is surface level, if you pinch your body and you can pinch and feel fat, that's subcutaneous. But the visceral is inside. You can't feel that. You don't know how much you have of it unless you get a visceral fat scan. And that's packed around your organs. So again, that's what makes it so important for us to be aware of and understand, because that visceral fat we can't see, and that's surrounding our important organs like our heart and our liver. So this is another hot take. The scale is your friend. And I know some of you here might probably have a complicated relationship with weighing yourself or stepping on a scale, and that's okay. This isn't meant to force you to use it, but it's simply meant to expand your perspective of it. Because hiding from the scale isn't healthy. Being in denial of something and hiding from something is generally not a healthy behavior. We can choose not to view the number on the scale or step on the scale. We can have that be a choice, but that's different from avoiding it. And again, if you do have a history of an eating disorder or related conditions, healing might mean you not stepping on the scale. Healing might mean you skipping this part, and that's totally fine and that is okay. But I like to view it as empowerment through having a deeper understanding. I have found the times in my life when I avoided the scale or I stepped on the scale and would have all these emotions stir up, and that number meant something to me other than breaking down the body composition, I was never able to lose weight. I was never able to make any changes actually last, and I was very unsuccessful. But I found that using the scale as a tool really, really helps me to stay in that state of awareness of my habits, what my habits are doing for my body, and also allows me to connect and appreciate my body because I also use this smart scale. I use a composition scale. Stepping on a scale just to see a number weight can somewhat be helpful in the sense of it can give you an idea of where you're at, but it is so to me invalid that it's like, why even bother? If you're going to use a scale, use a composition scale because this will allow you to see all the broken down numbers that are impacting your body weight. And again, if, for example, if you step on the scale and you weigh 150 pounds, let's just say you go to a party, you go on a trip, you go on vacation, you come back 3 days later, eat a lot of carbohydrates, drink a lot of alcohol, step on that scale again and like you're 160 and you're like, oh my God, did I gain 10 pounds in 3 days. What the hell's going on? No, what's happening is, as I mentioned, that glycogen storage. More carbohydrates equals more water in the body. So body weight goes up, but you can look at your body composition and see my body fat didn't really change. My muscle mass went up because it's heavier because there's more water and carbohydrates. And my total body water might have went up because again, there's more water in my body, but my fat mass stayed the same. So my weight, that doesn't mean I gain fat. That just means I have a lot of water in my body. I need to readjust my plan. And again, it gives you super concentrated direction and focus. And I find that it calms my panic because I'm like, all right, that's not body fat. I'm not worried about it. Go back to kind of that foundation. And as I mentioned, it's neutral. Your scale and weight loss in general is neutral. It's a tool, it's data. They represent uncovering patterns. That number does not mean anything to who you are as a person. So it's not a requirement of this program to do this, but I really do recommend challenging that fear of seeing a number when you step on a metal surface, asking yourself what it means to you, allowing yourself to practice stepping on that scale and seeing something other than just a number, especially get a body composition scale so you can see other factors of what's going on and really challenge fearing that number. Because if you're in a state of denying it or running away from it, that's not really healthy. Again, I mentioned certain situations, healing for you might mean not using that scale. And that's totally fine, depending on where you're at. So definitely do what you know is best for you. But I do love to use the scale. I talk about it often, and it's a tool I find very, very helpful for this exact reason. So this goes into how the process of how your body actually loses fat. Your body really, 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 really does not want to lose fat, especially easily and especially fast. That's a survival mechanism. That is fat doing its job. That's not a downside to your metabolism. That's how it was always designed to do or to be. Excess nutrition, when we have instances of like overeating or for long periods of time, let me be clear, it's converted to triglyceride and stored in lipid droplets of adipocytes. Lots of scientific terms. That just is fat cells, fatty acids stored in your fat tissue. So biochemically, when you wish to lose weight, what you are attempting to do is metabolize the triglyceride stored in your adipocytes. That is the process of lipolysis. I mentioned that in other modules. That is what we are doing. That is the goal that we are trying to reach when we want to lose weight in the sense of body fat. We want to metabolize the stored fat, we want to release the stored fat, and we want to burn, metabolize for energy that stored fat. Because fat in of itself actually does burn. Think about why whale oil was so great for human history. Fat has long carbon chains that are full of high energy electrons, so it can burn for a long period of time. So whale fat was phenomenal for society. And if you burned body fat too quickly, it would generate so much heat that it would actually destroy the body. So what the body does instead is extract that energy very slowly. So that oil can burn for a long period of time because it extracts it very slowly. So it does not cause destruction. And this is why the process takes a long period of time, especially when you have a lot of excess fat to lose. The body does this as a survival mechanism. So it's very protective that it does it in a slow manner so it would not blow you up. But this is, if you're interested in biochemistry, this is the biochemical reaction of how fat is used in the body and released. You have this process going on. So, that triglyceride, that fatty acid, that stored fat is combined with oxygen and turned into carbon dioxide, water, and then energy. So, fuel that you use. The carbon and the hydrogen depart as CO2 and water, and that leaves 6 oxygen molecules. 6 remaining oxygen molecules if you do this out, in terms of biochemistry. Obviously, we're not going to go into that. But the complete oxidation of 10 kilograms of human fat requires 29 kilograms of inhaled oxygen, which produces 28 kilograms of carbon dioxide and 11 kilograms of water. The fate of this one triglyceride and the extra 6 oxygen molecules, 4 of them are exhaled and 2 leave the body in the form of water. So essentially, what this states or what this means is that the lungs are the primary organ that helps you lose weight. Water formed will be excreted in the urine, in feces, sweat, breath, tears, other bodily fluids, things along those lines. But you breathe out the majority of weight that you lose, which is really cool. Again, you don't need to know this scientifically. It just gives you context of how it's happening within the body. And this is why respiratory health is super important. So, conditions like sleep apnea need to be addressed because they affect your breathing patterns and actually can disrupt the efficiency of this process. Because, again, the majority, when we break it all the way down, majority of the fat is lost through you breathing it out of your lungs. So, if your lungs aren't functioning properly, if you're not breathing properly, this can actually impact that. So, head on over to part 2.